Hello, everybody, and welcome to our conversation, which is part of DIVA's Lesbian Visibility Week. I'm extremely delighted here to be hosting a conversation amongst some absolutely brilliant women, some of whom I've been lucky enough to meet and know before. Others are new to me, but I know their organisations incredibly well and admire their work. We know that at the moment it's an incredibly difficult landscape for LGBTQI charities to be navigating, and so we're going to talk about that which is particular to now, but also this is an opportunity to talk in the round. As Lady Phil has already reminded me before this, we're lesbians every day, not just during Lesbian Visibility Week, and we do our work all year round. And so I know if you're anything like me, you're interested to know what each of our charities are getting up to through the year, what you can do to help, and what are the challenges that we're each facing. So I'm going to ask each of my wonderful panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off the conversation. So Phil, can we start with you?
Sure, and yes, happy Lesbian Visibility Week to everyone, and thank you, Jan. So I am Phil, Philippa Kujima, also known as Lady Phil, not as in given the title, I've just taken it. I head up a charity called Kaleidoscope Trust. Kaleidoscope Trust works with LGBT plus people in the Commonwealth to look at how we secure and uphold the rights. As you know, many LGBT people in countries are grappling and struggling and navigating laws and legislations that were put there through colonial era laws that doesn't allow for them to be themselves and doesn't allow for them to live without freedom from discrimination. And that's Kaleidoscope Trust. I also am co-founder of another amazing organisation called UK Black Pride, and UK Black Pride is very much part of the wider Pride family. It brings together Black and brown people, people of colour, BAME, that's Black and Asian minority ethnic people, to celebrate who they are, as well as challenging biphobia, homophobia, transphobia, and at the same time, the racism that is structural and systemic within and outside of the LGBT plus communities.
Busy lady. Susie.
Hi, my name's Susie Green and my pronouns are she, her, and I am a CEO of a charity called Mermaids. Mermaids is UK-wide, and we support trans and gender diverse children and young people and their families. And I suppose one of the challenges that we're seeing around now at the moment because of COVID-19 is access. So as a charity, we provide a helpline, online web chat, we've got an email service. We also deliver lots of face-to-face events, and obviously they're all closed at the moment, across the country. And we also do advocacy and support from a legal structure. We have a legal manager who works with families and young people who've had experienced discrimination. And our service users are between, well, to be honest, we've got parents with children as young as 3 or 4, and we go up to and including 19 years of age for young people who want to access our online groups. And we're very busy, which is great, which means that people are finding us, but also points to the additional needs during this particular time as well.
Thank you, Susie. Natasha.
Yeah, I'm Natasha Walker. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm one of the co-chairs of Switchboard, the LGBT plus helpline. So for those of you that don't know, we are a confidential helpline open to the LGBTQ plus communities and beyond. For anyone who wants to talk about sexuality, gender identity, sexual health, and emotional well-being. And we have 3 arms to our services. We've got our telephone line, our instant messaging, and our email service. And we're open from 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. As Jan said earlier, 365 days a year.
Thank you. And Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Bowyer, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Services for AKT. Some people might know us as the Albert Kennedy Trust. We work with young people who are aged between primarily 16 and 25, who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, or increasingly at the moment living in a hostile environment. We operate a service that gives advice, guidance, also a lot of advocacy, which is something that we've seen increase since the start of lockdown particularly. And we offer all of our normal services, apart from in the physical flesh, at the moment online. So we have a live web chat service that runs between 10 and 6 every day. We also have our referrals, which young people can refer anyone they're concerned about 24 hours a day. And we're also running some online programs of social engagement for young people who are feeling incredibly isolated at the moment. So yeah.
Thank you. And I realise now I forgot to introduce myself. That's because I know who I am, so it didn't occur to me. I'm Jan Gooding. I'm the chair of Stonewall. My pronouns are she, her, and I suppose I should proudly say lesbian too, given the context of this week. That's not something you often find yourself saying out loud, actually, but I'm very happy to do that. And Stonewall's work is focused originally advocacy and changing the law so there was greater equality, but we now also work in schools, in workplaces, and in communities to try and change the attitudes of people to LGBT people so that everyone can live their lives as themselves, which obviously is the minimum one should feel able to ask from each other. So let's get into it. I know all of you have already touched on the current lockdown. We'll come to that in a moment, but I would just like to start, given DIVA have been kind enough to host this conversation, by talking about why it's important to have something like Lesbian Visibility Week. There are all sorts of special days and weeks and months that go on, and this is declared the Week of the Lesbians. So what are your thoughts on that? Lucy, perhaps I could start with you in the...
Sure. I guess it's sometimes that we see young people who've had to live in stealth for quite some period of time. And one of the things that often they'll look for is use the internet or use word of mouth to find out more about things that they've been wondering about and their feelings. And seeing something like Lesbian Visibility Week, there's a lot of content on social media, there's a lot of conversations about it that mean that young people can explore that perhaps anonymously and look at where they might feel that they fit within those brackets. And I think, you know, having that as a young person and, you know, finally connecting the dots of how you might have felt for a long period of time is, I don't know, like from personal experience, it is that light bulb moment and you think, actually, I'm not alone. Yeah. And I think that that's such an important thing. And I think that particularly the word lesbian as well, not all young people identify as being lesbian. And there's been some negative connotations around the word. And I think it's about reclaiming that for people and saying that this is a positive thing. And, you know, it's also sometimes that lesbian gets lost a bit within that kind of LGBT bracket. And it's nice to see that there's some positivity around and there's some real conversations going on online as well between people to talk about their identity. And young people will be hearing that and seeing that. I think it's vital to see.
Natasha, I can see you nodding away there. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Oh yeah, I completely agree with what Lucy said, both from a personal perspective and as a wider community-led perspective. I was looking at the survey results and I just think, you know, the results of those really help to answer this question. Just some of the statistics, I think 27% have been made to feel uncomfortable because of their sexuality at work. And 79% of women surveyed thought LGBTQI men have more visibility. You know, I think one of the things that's really jumping out to me is like how little data or insight we have into LGBTQI women, from their thoughts to their mental health, to their sexual health, especially women from marginalised communities. And we need to know more. And this is such a great way to get that message out there. The more we know, the more we can help. And I saw Dr. Ronk speak during LGBT Women's Health Week. And in their words, they said, we cannot be what we cannot see. So I just think that really sums it up nicely.
Yes, exactly. Susie, you're nodding as well there. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we just see so much in terms of isolation and loneliness and people feeling very much like they're on their own and there's nobody like them. And I think that it's really important to have visibility around the LGBTQ plus community, that young people can see other people, can see that they're not alone, can start to think about what that means for them, but also to see that it's okay, that it's fine, that you know, this isn't something that's necessarily going to be detrimental to their life. And I think that goes across the whole of the sphere. But I think you're right. I think the L gets lost sometimes, and I think it's really important that it's that these dates, these weeks and days, etc., that are across our calendar are there specifically to shine a light and to say, look, it's okay, and this is who I am, and this is and it's okay to be who I am, and look, you know, you can get on and you can lead a fruitful life, and you can be happy, you can have a partner, and to try and combat that shame that so many LGBT people feel. Thank you.
Phil, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think my colleagues and my comrades have summed it up beautifully, that I don't really, I think when we're talking about the word lesbian, and I love saying it, lesbian, I really love saying it. I know that people feel uncomfortable by that word. And, you know, I have to question, why is it that you feel uncomfortable about us using the word lesbian to identify in a particular way? And maybe it has stuff to do with whether it's the patriarchy, whether it's, you know, just a number of different things, but one should be able to identify as they wish. But when we're talking about lesbians, we must also talk about the visibility of different lesbians, because there are some lesbians that may still get particular platforms and profiles, and others which don't, when we're talking about, as you know, Natasha said, marginalized groups. And maybe my reasoning for constantly talking about being a Black African lesbian, how I sum myself up all the time, is because often we don't see ourselves in that wider LGBTQI plus community, or communities, I should say. So yeah, I think that there's, you know, I echo everything that my colleagues have said, but we must also remember the different intersections within being a lesbian as well.
Yes, it's interesting you raised that, because I remember early on going to a talk that Ruth Hunt hosted, where she described the double glass ceiling. You know, there's already a glass ceiling that's understood with women. If you're a lesbian, it's a double glass ceiling. If you're Black or disabled, it becomes a triple glass ceiling, at which point one's head is getting extremely sore, trying to crash through. So I really do take your point on that, Phil. I think we often forget that there's a layering of discrimination. And I've certainly had Black women say to me that their Blackness is always seen first, even before their gender, which I think white women don't realise at all. So it's an extremely important point. Certainly when I came out, I think the only lesbians I'd heard of were Martina Navratilova and Sandy Toksvik. So they weren't even in business. So, you know, they were from other worlds of entertainment and sport. And certainly when I went to Aviva, I was advised not to be out. It was like, what are you doing? It's bad enough being a woman in the city. You definitely don't want to be known as a lesbian as well. So I think there are many sectors and areas of society where lesbians are still not visible, which for me is why this is so important. We're still drawing out and encouraging people to stand up and be counted. So let's move on to the inevitable, which is the current lockdown. And I'm sure everyone is having similar but different and specific experiences. And I suppose I'd be really interested to know that there's three areas of impact, it seems to me. One is income, one is on one's staff, and the other is on one's supporters and service users. And I know you may not be able to sort of tell us everything, some of it may be confidential, but it'd be very interesting to get a sense of what is your reality just now. Phil, perhaps I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, when we're talking about what the impact is of COVID-19 on the people that we support, there are a number of things, because I work in an international LGBT charity. It's not domestic focused. So the trailblazing, amazing activists that I work with, for them, social distancing and lockdown is very different to what we experience. And, you know, I was reminded that it's not social distancing for them, it's physical distancing, because of the amount of social distancing that happens anyway. Just by virtue of being seen as a pariah, you know, they're discriminated against, people stay away from them, they're not seen as, you know, any form of citizens, they are the lowest of the lowest in various countries. So we're, you know, we've looked at this impact in a way that we're trying to ascertain and draw out research. You know, there's things around education, housing, poverty, access to health, you know, mental health and their own well-being. And there was a young woman who said to us on a Zoom call, she said, whilst we understand that we have got this one state sanctioned exercise, she was out doing her jog, she's an out lesbian woman. She said that she was manhandled, these were her words, she was manhandled by the police because they told her she has no place running out here. And she is very masculine presenting. I'm not saying that that should be a thing, but she's very masculine presenting. And she said, but by her being manhandled, she had nowhere else to turn to, or to even go to the police to report this. Because one, it's illegal in her country to be LGBT. Two, she's a woman, and you know, the sexism, misogyny, and all the other factors that come into play in terms of gender-based violence and things that happen to women in this southern part of Africa. So she has felt completely isolated. She feels that she has no recourse, nowhere to turn to if something seriously happens to her. The fear of some LGBT people even having to go to hospitals for a checkup because of maybe how they present, how they look, you know, how they talk, whatever it may be, fills them with dread. And I think that, you know, those are the top line surface things, but we can get right deep rooted and look at the socioeconomic issues that face some of our LGBT people, LGBT plus people in these countries where they are completely marginalized, ostracized, so they're not able to access the same things an ordinary person would be able to. One, because of fear. Two, because it may be illegal. And three, because they also don't have access to funds in the way that they would wish to, because of the various factors, underlying factors to them. Homelessness is such a huge issue in terms of LGBT plus people abroad. Because various people will not house them, they will not get to apply for, you know, housing in the same way. So there is, you know, I don't want to make this sound all doom and gloom, but our work around human rights has to be, the government have to understand that whenever there's a crisis or a pandemic, one of the first things to get hit are the charities and organizations and NGOs that are leading and providing these services. So rightfully so, we understand that the government have put a freeze on various things that are happening internationally because they have to redivert their efforts to COVID-19 responses. But what happens to the work around human rights for LGBT plus people? It doesn't just stop.
What has been the impact on Kaleidoscope right now in the last month, Phil? Have you found your income has dried up? How is it affecting your work? Or are you focusing on some countries more than others in the way you described that terrible story?
Well, the income hasn't yet dried up. And I say yet because, you know, we don't know what next week's going to look like, let alone the next 2-3 months. But we've had to do like a real mapping of priorities and strip back, hold back on various activities that we wish to do, because our work is not focused in the UK. It is very much about traveling and making sure that our networks can access heads of government, so to speak, so they can lobby them. I think with Kaleidoscope Trust, you know, furlough is an issue. So we have had to look at furloughing, you know, our team members to ensure that we can use the coronavirus job retention scheme. But at the same time, it means that we're going to have to hold back on other bits of work that need to be done, which will ultimately have an impact on the services. And I say services in a loose way because we're not a servicing organisation, but we provide a route in to connect the dots around the Commonwealth. I think the difficulty and the impact on Kaleidoscope Trust is about the well-being and mental health of those who are working in the organisation and having to cope around working from home. Yeah. Whilst it may be good, and you know, we've become very creative and innovative about how we interact with each other, I think spending huge amounts of time behind a computer can also be really draining on one's health and mental ability. You know, some of us are living in homes where we live by ourselves or have had to live with families that actually it means we've had to self-edit who we are as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you. So very much the business interruption impact, and also on your own staff, their mental health and well-being. Susie, what perhaps you could give us a bit of an insight into how this is impacting trans boys and girls and their parents at the moment, and your service provision.
Yeah, and obviously non-binary young people as well need to be included within that too. We're seeing our web chat is being very well used. That's mainly where young people use to contact us. Apparently they don't want to phone us up and speak to an old person, apparently. I've been told that. And when I asked the young person who said, how old is old? He said 30. So, yeah. Which I thought was quite fun. But yeah, so our web chat is being very well used. Our helpline numbers have gone up, though not in quite the same trajectory. And what we're seeing on our online groups in terms of young people talking around what it's like, because we estimate about 25% of the young people that are on our youth group, it's just over 800 young people who interact online. And at least about 25%, I would say, are not out to their families. And they're finding this period of time really intensely difficult because they're having, if they haven't talked to their parents, what they've lost is the interaction, the daily interaction face-to-face with their friends who may be supportive of them, who may know who they are. You know, going into school, often they've got a trusted member of staff that they may talk to. Or they may be in a position where their parents are actually monitoring what their online usage is, and they're stuck in a position where they're 24/7 with somebody who doesn't support who they are. So some young people have attempted to talk to their parents or carers about, you know, their identity and who they identify as and who they really are, and have been shut down. Others are scared to. And I know that obviously some of the work that that all of the other organisations that are on here today is around safety and ensuring that if a young person is going to disclose, that is not going to end up with them in a position where they're either open to abuse or made homeless. So these are the sorts of conversations that are going on those online groups about the shame and the fear around being themselves and being forced into a position where they're literally on lockdown with the very people who should love them unconditionally, but unfortunately it's not always the case. As far as Mermaids is concerned, you know, I think, you know, Lady Phil, you know, you just said it perfectly. It is impacting our staff. This is really difficult in terms of difficult times. We are used to interacting with one another, with meeting and getting together. We're in a position where we can't deliver any of our face-to-face services, so we're not doing any training, we're not going to any events. Conferences are like this, they're all online, which is great because at least we can do that. But also what we've tried to do is We've got online groups that meet once a month, generally on a Saturday or a Sunday, all around the country. And what we're trying to do is replicate some of the work that we do around those and our residential weekends, which we've had to cancel 3 of that are over this period of time, just to give people the opportunity to interact with both members of Mermaids staff, role models, allies, and other people, our patrons particularly, obviously, who are all trans, to actually interact with people and to be able to, you know, this conversation that we're having obviously doesn't have people chatting in and dialing in and asking questions. We've opened that up, and we've done a day-long DigiFest on the 4th of April, which was really popular. And what we're doing now is we're doing pop-ups that are based around, so last week we did a private one for service users, families and young people, so that they could speak to the gender identity services for children to find out how they were dealing with COVID-19. They could speak to role models, so they could talk to, in the same way that when they attend a residential, there's generally a role model section where ex-service users of Mermaids stand up and talk about where they are and how their transition went, and people can ask questions. We did the same thing. So we had sessions where we had young people, young adults, and then we had a session with parents who were supporting their children as well on to answer questions. We're trying to do as much of that as we can, as well as continuing to run our helpline email and chat service. But it's, you know, in terms of income, you touched on income being impacted. Ours has. We have seen donations drop off. All of our income from training and delivering training and events, etc., that's obviously just come to a screeching halt. So at the moment, we're just digging in and going, right, okay, we just need to survive this period of time because our service users need us to, and that is our focus, really.
Thank you, Susie. That sounds really, really tough. The thought of being imprisoned with people who don't accept you, absolutely horrifying, and being cut off from those who might be supporting you. Natasha, Switchboard is over 46 years old. I'm sure even in that length of time, very distinguished, you won't have experienced anything like this. What's happening for your organisation?
Yeah, that's quite right, Jan. We've never done remote working for our phone line before. We do it for instant messaging and email. So when the UK government announced the lockdown, we had to make a really difficult decision to shut our phone room for the first time in 46 years. But not shutting our helpline. So I'm really proud to say that we can continue to support those in need. And people are talking about support here as well, and that's one thing that was part of the complex decision that we took, and that all of our volunteers are now taking calls from home. We've got nearly 230 volunteers, and it's about supporting those who are out there wanting to contact us at Switchboard, but it's also about supporting our volunteers and our staff and making sure that they're okay in this really complex time. Taking calls as a volunteer at Switchboard, these are often really complex discussions, very difficult, and we need to make sure we're protecting everyone and creating a super support network that runs alongside it, which we're doing, and I'm really, really pleased that's one of our main priorities. But yeah, it's so interesting to hear both of you, Phil and Susie, talk. It's such a difficult time at the moment, and we've got increasing levels of anxiety, isolation and loneliness, and we knew that we had to keep our phone lines open to be able to be there for people who need us. Almost every single call, and when I talk about call, I mean phone, instant messaging and email, almost every single one is talking about COVID-19 and the impact on them because of that increased anxiety, increased isolation. Calls have gone up this year by 20% already in comparison to 2019. We've seen a massive increase of people under 24 contacting us. Similar to Susie, they're predominantly contacting us through instant messaging and email. That maybe they're more comfortable with that technology, but also I think we need to recognise that people are at home or in living situations that they might not feel comfortable in, or they're slightly complex and difficult, and being overheard on the phone is a real concern. So I think it's really positive that there are these alternative methods that people can reach out. We've also seen a 42% increase in transgender and gender non-conforming people contacting us, and that could be because they are in lockdown with transphobic families, or they're just coming out to their people that they live with at the moment, but also lots of and Susie, I'm sure you can speak more specifically on this, but lots of gender clinics are having to really cut back and restrict or shut down, and people's treatments are stopping or being paused or being delayed, and it's having such a huge impact on everyone. But you know, it's across the whole spectrum of LGBTQ plus people, and also those who are supporting LGBTQ plus people. You know, we've had young people contact us just feeling really affected by their school shutting. We've had young people who have come out to their family who are not dealing with it very well, and they're really worried that they're about to be made homeless. And we've got people who are older, you know, the elderly community, an already very hidden part of society, feeling so much more isolated than normal, who are just reaching out because they want to talk to someone, you know, maybe have a chat, maybe they haven't seen anyone in a really, really long time. I think, it's doing this thing where it's shining this magnifying glass on all of the existing issues that we've got across the communities and just blowing them up. And I just think the main thing that we're trying to focus on at Switchboard at the moment is making sure that people know that we're open, know that we're here, know that they've got someone to talk to, someone to reach out to, you know, that they're not alone because they've got us and all of these fantastic services that, you know, we all offer, and all of the amazing groups across the LGBT plus sector. You know, as you said, Jan, we've been supporting the LGBTQ plus community since 1974, and we have no plans to stop doing that now.
That's wonderful. And I think as it's something we share, I'd be very interested in your tips on supporting your own staff who are obviously taking really difficult calls all day, often in isolation themselves. I mean, do you have any tips you could offer us all on how you're looking after your front line?
Yeah, it's a really good and important question. We put together, so we've actually, lots of people are contacting us through the helpline with this heightened anxiety, isolation, loneliness. So we put together an emotional wellbeing support pack, which you can download from our website, which has got some good tips on how to deal with loneliness, anxiety, and if you're feeling depressed, and how to feel more connected at this time. But we have a sort of mirror pack that we've got for our volunteers and our staff, which I would be very happy to share with anyone who would like to see it. But one of the key things that we are doing is making sure that our volunteers do shifts, usually in 3-hour increments, and we ensure that they check in with this wider support group. They're called the Sisters Support Group, and we can talk to them about how that call was, but make sure that they are getting into the zone, if you like, before taking a call, or, you know, starting their job in the day, and making sure that they're giving themselves time to unwind afterwards. You know, we all work in really complex areas, and there's overlaps of, you know, difficult things that could resonate with you personally, but also just really complex issues. And I think it's about taking time and letting yourself unwind properly. We're not traveling to or from work, you know, we're on our own. This is a wonderful way to interact with each other, but we need to make sure that if you can't support yourself first, then you can't support anyone else. And I think that's the real key.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Thank you for that. And I'm sure people will want to ask you for your pack. That sounds exactly on the button. Lucy, there's never been a more difficult time to be homeless, more vulnerable than ever. And we read in the papers about hotels opening up their doors. You know, there seem to be sparks of light and hope, but what actually is your experience on the ground?
Well, I think everybody's touched on it. It's that living in a hostile environment. So I think that what we've seen is an increase in young people contacting us, not only new young people, but existing young people that we've worked with previously, who feel like either their jobs are at risk, they've lost work, or they're having to move back to somewhere where they thought they'd never have to go back to again, possibly with their family, or who are being told things like, I mean, one of the shocking things that we've seen repeatedly is young people being told, when you get to this birthday, you need to leave. Well, when you don't know when lockdown might end, that's living in a really kind of threatening environment where you're not really sure whether something's going to change or whether, you know, you're living on a knife edge. And it's not just that kind of living at home either. It could be that you're living with housemates who are, you know, it's a toxic environment. It might be there's lots of transphobia or homophobia. You feel like, you know, we're seeing young people who really are worried about what's going to happen, and their mental health has completely taken a huge slide. So a lot of the work that we're doing is splitting it into the practical stuff. So we've seen an increase in the amount of young people who are rough sleeping. So, you know, we see hotels, but that's not necessarily the experience that we've seen of young people approaching and asking for help. So a lot of the work that our team have been doing is around advocacy at local authorities, because there's a lot of money being thrown at helping people who are visibly rough sleeping, but it doesn't tend to be the pattern that LGBTQ plus young people follow in terms of homelessness. Often it's, you know, going night by friends. Well, if you can't do that, where do you go? And the end of the road comes a lot quicker. So we've seen people getting in touch saying, I actually really have nowhere to go. I've been sleeping outside. And because there's so few face-to-face services where people can come to, it tends to be that someone's in a real dire state right at that moment. So I think that's what we're seeing, a lot of urgency from young people wanting to be able to get help right now. Some young people worrying about being outed or feeling like they need to come out because, say, they've been at university and they've had to move home, so they've been living quite openly, and then they're coming home to environments that they were glad to have left. To then work out how do you negotiate that when also the alternatives are not there. So, you know, we don't have the same options as we normally would have around relieving homelessness. So it's about our teams being inventive and trying to make things easier for young people and manage those risks as well, because there are some young people who absolutely need to leave their home right now, and we've been working really hard together. And I think we were in a good position as an organisation because we're across 4 cities. So, you know, we're in London, Manchester, Newcastle upon Tyne and Bristol. We already work quite well across those cities. So we've been utilising our skill sets within those staff team to be able to give extra support. But also we've seen a lot of young people contacting us from outside of those areas. And indeed, a lot of the things that Phil was saying about international work, we've had a lot more international contacts from people who are feeling really desperate and are not able to move around or feel threatened at home. So I think it's really difficult for young people to be able to balance, you know, all of the demands upon them at the moment. Also, a lot of the young people that we're working with are working in low paid or 0-hour contract jobs. Some of them have completely lost all their work and are now having to renegotiate with landlords. They're not sure where their rent payments are coming. And talking about, you know, we've been really concentrating our fundraising on being able to provide a pot of emergency funding to help young people alleviate that poverty, so that what we're anticipating is when lockdown is lifted, and indeed when the eviction ban is lifted, we're anticipating that there's going to be an influx, even more of our service demands upon our service. So we've been, you know, really generously supported to be able to actually just have some funds to be able to help people with rent arrears, to be able to give them the deposits that they need to go, so that they at least know in the future there's going to be some help, because young people are, you know, pretty desperate right now. And reducing that
in circumstances, sorry to interrupt you, in circumstances of a lockdown, do you think people realise they can leave, that if they are basically imprisoned in an abusive situation, do you think they understand that they can get out, a bit like people suffering other forms of domestic abuse? Is that an important message to get across today?
Yeah, and some of them, I mean, I've seen several of our referrals come in and they say this is not urgent, but, and when you actually read behind that, there is a lot of urgency of those young people, because they're very unlikely to contact us if it's not urgent. And I think there is that need, and talking about the, you know, the domestic abuse kind of exit planning, which we have seen quite a lot of publicity around refugees struggling to be able to keep up with helping people effectively. For us, it is very much about our staff risk planning with those young people and making sure that they know that they can go out and what we'll be able to help them with. Because some young people absolutely just need to get out of that environment, because it is causing a lot of issues around their mental health.
I can see Phil wants to make a point.
I did try and raise my hand on so that we can see. I think that it would be remiss of me to not mention the impact of COVID-19 on Black and minority ethnic people. You know, as a patron of AKT, we already know that over 30% of your service users are from BAME backgrounds. You know, the switchboard, I'm sure, are inundated with, you know, people of colour who are obviously anxious and worried about seeing the rates and the spike of deaths towards Black and Asian minority communities. And also, you know, I can't not talk about our trans POC people who are some of the comments that I'm seeing, they're so worried about not even being able to get their shots, their access to whether it's HIV, AIDS medication. And this is where I talk about the intersections of our LGBT plus community, because we're not one monolithic, homogenous community. We are very different groups of people. And I'm sure this also lends itself to disabled LGBT people and the services that they require. You know, whilst we're having this particular platform on Zoom, not everyone's going to be able to hear us. And that is a barrier within itself. You know, the international activists that I work with, some of them cannot even use Zoom, Google Hangouts, Blue Jeans. You know, there are states that watch and listen to what they do, if they organize or galvanize in different ways. So this is not to create a hierarchy of that oppression, but it's to understand the nuanced ways in how we have to navigate and create and carve out different ways of working. But, you know, I totally echo everything that's been said by my colleagues here, but I really want us to also look at that impact, which is disproportionately hitting Black and ethnic minority communities. And that means it will hit Black and ethnic minority communities in the LGBT spectrum, as well as any other facet of services that we need to access. And UK Black Pride has certainly seen that with its cancellation of Pride. You know, we've had people saying we are so depressed because that was the one place we felt that we could meet our chosen family and have our home. But I think at the beginning, when Susie said it is about safety, it's about also making the right decisions, that if we're trying to safeguard our organisations and our staff, we've got to safeguard our communities as well.
So we're coming towards the end of our time now. Unfortunately, I could talk to you wonderful people all day, but people watching this will have been moved. They will have been upset. They will also have been hopeful, because all of you are there doing this amazing work. And there are people who may well want to help in some way. What would be your, if I was to invite each of you, what would be your one or two asks that you would give anyone watching who would like to put their shoulder to the wheel? What would it be? Maybe Susie, I could start with you.
I think at the moment, because we in terms of our priorities are around delivering services and trying to reach out to people, we're not doing sort of volunteer applications as such, but if people want to volunteer for us, they can apply online and we will get, you know, to them at the end of this process. But we can't really sort that now. We have to focus on how we're reaching our young people and their families. But I suppose the other thing is social media is particularly toxic, and there are certain areas of social media where it just seems to be day in, day out a pile-on, especially against trans women and parents of trans children. And I think that if you want to be an ally and you want to help in this, you know, don't get engaged in a massive argument. There's no point in doing so. But standing behind organisations such as all of these, you know, all of us in the room here virtually today, and standing behind those organisations and getting involved in campaigns and putting your name and you know, your like of an Instagram, or posting something up that shows your support for the LGBTQ plus community, including, as you say, especially Phil, it is disproportionately affecting BAME communities. I think we need as much allyship as we can possibly get right now, to really try and work against the negativity that's still out there.
So that's brilliant advice. Another form of visibility, visible allies, without getting into a stupid argument, as you say. Thank you. Great. Natasha, anything from you?
Well, I just second everything Susie said. But I think that the main thing is, and this is something that's really needed from all charities, is just to spread the word, raise awareness, let people know that we're still here, we're still answering the phones, IMs and emails, whether that's dropping our leaflets or our details through all of your neighbours' doors on your 1 allocated hour of exercise a day, or spreading the word on social media. You know, the key thing is that there are heightened levels of isolation at the moment, and loneliness, and all of the complexities that, you know, Susie, Phil and Lucy have spoken to. And unless people know that they have these support services out there, then what are their options? So yeah, that's the main takeaway. Just spread the word. Spread the word.
Thank you very much. Lucy?
The same thing. So our biggest way that young people hear about us is through word of mouth. And so, you know, please retweet us. We've got a AKT Together hashtag, which is all of our activities online about reducing social isolation. You know, signposting people to us, because we are working and we are able to help. And I will say it is, if you've got a few pounds in your pocket that you're not spending on lunch or whatever else, that you can afford to support all of the organisations, because there is going to be a huge gap. And, you know, it's needed more than ever, and it's going to be needed more than ever in 3 months, 6 months, and you know, we don't know how long the impact is actually going to take. So, you know, if you're able to do some of the online fundraising, or even just do a little awareness campaign or support somebody, it will make a massive difference to those people who are more vulnerable, and we can use that money wisely.
It's a good point. Whilst many people are locked in, they're not spending in the same way, so send some our way would be great. Phil, final word to you.
Yes, so this is not a shameless plug, but it's a plug. Allow us to continue supporting LGBT plus activists abroad by donating, by reaching out, and you know, if you've got contacts in various countries that we can connect to as well, that's giving us easy routes and easy access to be able to reach them. Kaleidoscope Trust is a very small charity, but it does huge work in terms of its global reach. So I would say to, you know, those who do have a pretty penny that might not be going to the ballet or the opera at the moment, please, please, please donate. And it will be the same for, you know, AKT, LGBT Switchboard and Mermaids. But lastly, I think the biggest thing that anybody can do right now in this particular COVID era that we're finding ourselves is showing solidarity, love and compassion. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And what a brilliant way to end. So please show up as allies, be visible as allies. Please spread the word that all these wonderful charities, they're still open for business. They may be doing it in a different way, but we're all still here working. And as Phil says, and Lucy says, we need your money too, because there's work that needs to go on overseas, even more desperate than ever. As you know, if we think we've got it tough here, that's nothing to those countries where, as you know, it's still illegal and a capital offence. So we must not forget our brothers and sisters overseas too. Thank you so much for the most wonderful conversation. It's been the highlight of my week, seeing you all and talking to you. And thank you very much for giving your time this morning and for the wonderful work that you all do. And please convey our love and gratitude to all of your staff, who I know are working really hard to help all of us through this difficult period. Thank you very much.
And thank you to you too, Jack. Thanks everyone, and happy Lesbian Visibility.
Happy Lesbian Visibility.
Happy Lesbian Visibility.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.